listen to this podcast, or I'll gut you.
Welcome back, Horror Hounds, to Ghostman and Rivera's Horror Show podcast.
I'm Mike Ghostman Pickle.
And I'm James Rivera. So, as everybody in the horror world knows right now, the brand new Candyman film has opened up to number one at the box office, $22.2 million on its opening weekend, continuing horror's dominance at the box office. Candyman 2021. We're going to be talking about the new Candyman movie, and we're going to be discussing the quote-unquote woke legacy, because that's the buzzword that everybody loves to toss around now, apparently, without understanding what it actually means. The woke legacy of Candyman and its connections to this new Candyman. And we're going to break down a lot of the criticisms we see, a lot of the silliness going around, and a lot of the idiotic backlash that I've seen against this movie. I'm like, I have no problem with people not liking a movie or disagreeing, but this movie in particular has triggered some funny people out there.
And I've heard some, legitimate gripes, like minor legitimate gripes that I kind of agree with, and I don't take issue with them at all. But some of this other too woke and complaining about the kills and complaining about everything about this movie. All the complaints are almost all misguided.
Yes. Again, I actually don't think this is a perfect film. I think it has more than a few flaws, and there's a few areas where it can improve. But the areas where it's being criticized are complete nonsense, so we're going to get into that too.
This was directed and co-written by up-and-coming director, black female director Nia DeCosta, and she became the first black female filmmaker to have a film open at number one. Very proud of her for that. Excellent job on this film. It's also co-written by Jordan Peele and Wynn Rosenfeld, who was one of the producers. And this is a synopsis of this one. In present day, a decade after the last of the Cabrini Towers were torn down, Anthony and his partner move into a loft in the now gentrified Cabrini. A chance encounter with an old-timer exposes Anthony to the true story behind Candyman. Anxious to use these macabre details in his studio as fresh grist for paintings, he unknowingly opens a door to a complex past that unravels his own sanity and unleashes a terrifying wave of violence. And as we mentioned before, this stars Yaya AbdulMateen II as Anthony. He's awesome in this. He's as great as I hoped he would be. And a big surprise in this was Teyonah Parris. She was so good as the girlfriend Brianna. She was from Dear White People. She was also in Mad Men. She had a really great part in Mad Men. She was in Chirac and also Point Blank. It was Joe Lynch's film.
Okay.
It also starred Nathan Stewart Jarrett as Troy, played Browna's brother. He was hilarious. He had some of the funniest lines in the movie.
Yeah.
And Coleman Domingo played William Burke. He's the resident that first tells the Candyman story. And then Vanessa Williams, of course, returns as Anne Marie from the original. And we also get to see Tony Todd from the original and get a voiceover from Virginia Madsen. As we said, it actually made $32 million worldwide so far. And the budget was only $25 million, so it's already exceeded its budget.
That's pretty awesome. I had pretty high expectations for this movie. And for the most part, except for a few things and things I see here and there, I actually think it mostly met my expectations. One, I think what separates this from the other Candyman sequels is, unlike 2 and 3, it's not functioning like a Nightmare on Elm Street sequel would, where you're just capitalizing on the personality and the acting of the main villain, whether it's Freddy Krueger or in this case it's Candyman. I feel like what the sequels did was try to turn Candyman into a typical horror franchise. You know what I mean? Something like a Chucky or a Freddy. And the original one had a lot more depth to it, and I don't think it was ever meant to be a franchise like that. This new one like many movies do these days, what we call legacy sequels, it completely ignores part 2 and 3 and is a direct sequel to the original film, which I actually really appreciate. It has really good tie-ins and callbacks to the movie, but I know that this is going to be something that upsets people because it's a complete reinvention of the legend. It remains completely true to the original Candyman film, but I don't think it erases anything at all about the events of the original Candyman. But it does add a lot of wrinkles to the legend of Candyman, and it expands the mythology in a very big way. And because of that, the approach that they're using, this isn't the type of Candyman movie or a sequel where it's going to be Tony Todd centered, where the Candyman is back and he's here to slash everybody up. This movie has a lot more on its mind. I think it's quite a bit more ambitious than just being another Tony Todd sequel. Tony Todd does make an appearance in this movie as the Candyman. It's very brief, but I think it's very satisfying when it comes. So I think that element alone, that it's not Tony Todd centric, is what's going to a big part. Aside from the stupid wokeness complaints, I think that's what's going to split a lot of the fan base down the middle for this one.
Well, it's not like they ignored the original story. Like a lot of people are claiming that they ignore it. They don't. They tell the whole original story, and they tell it instead of flashbacks, because if they would have told the story in flashbacks, it would have been accused of being like this trauma porn again, where it's the trials and tribulations of Black people turned into horror tropes. Yeah, but that's why I like that they use the puppetry animation sequences, because these were done by Manual Cinema in Chicago, and the director said that she and Jordan Peele chose the shadow puppets in favor of like traditional flashback scenes or clips from the first film, because they pretty much laughed at the idea of doing something like that. It would have cheapened it if you would have thrown in some kind of flashbacks or some kind of clips from the original film to catch you up. I think it was much more creative to use this puppetry animation.
These shadow puppets that they use start off where you see somebody actually operating it, and then it becomes a storytelling device that they incorporate into the rest of the movie. And it's very simplistic, and the methods are even a little bit crude, but there's something about it that feels so expressive. They managed to like take these simple cutouts and these simple shadows, and like great art, I feel like there's pain expressed in some of these stories. When it does the flashbacks, you can tell, as simplistic as these cardboard cutouts are, you can very much tell who Helen Lyle is and all these other characters in the movie. It's very distinct, and I think it gives the movie a completely different flavor from the original. It doesn't, kind of gives it its own little aesthetic little cherry on top that the original one does not have. It has a completely different look from the original movie too.
And I like how they address some of the stories of the original, and then they tell them in the wrong way, because it shows how stories are kind of bastardized and kind of morph over the years. And so that was a cool part of it.
I think that's a very intentional choice, what you're talking about, how stories are bastardized and kind of changed over the years. Because another thing, aside from the social commentary, a big thing about Candyman, it's about urban legends and the power of urban legends and how people tell stories. And with most urban legends, every time it gets passed down, everybody always adds their own little wrinkle to it, their own little twist to it. So it kind of expands and turns into something. So it's a little bit off, but it kind of makes sense in the context of urban legends that kind of grow out of control. And it also shows Candyman as an urban legend of himself that has grown way beyond way beyond the scope of what we thought Candyman was in the original film. I think it turns Candyman into something much larger in this movie by not making Tony Todd the focus of it.
Exactly. They didn't dilute him. They actually made the mythos bigger. So it actually does dismantle the mythos of the original, but it also expands on it and tells it in a different way. And I think it goes in a very interesting direction. I mean, everything makes sense to where the direction of the story goes.
I think
like
so.
everything that happened in Cabrini Green in real life kind of feeds into this story that they came up with. It's kind of a perfect story to continue that original one with, and I really liked it. I mean, I love that it didn't feel like a big bloated, big budget studio production because it was only $25 million, but it had the polish of a big studio production. And then it didn't feel like a low budget indie feature, but it felt very personal and made with passion like an indie production. I like that juxtaposition.
It's also probably one of the most beautiful, aesthetically beautiful horror movies of recent years. It has, and that's a pretty big feat to pull off, because I think the original Candyman is a beautiful atmospheric film. This in too is a beautiful atmospheric film, but it doesn't look anything like the original Candyman. I think the color scheme, the palette, the choices are all very individual, and I think I like that because it completely separates this movie apart as its own entity. It completely stands on its own, and I like a lot of the compositions and the shot selections that Nia DeCosta really taps into. One of the things that I like that she does, she shows, and you mentioned, she shows a lot of shots looking upward, which I'm sure that you've noticed.
Yeah.
A lot of camera shots where you're kind of looking upward and seeing the towering presence of like a Cabrini Green and the area, kind of the oppressiveness of the area. The original Candyman had the opposite shots. It had shots that were overhead, looking down into Cabrini Green and looking into it from the outside. And I think that's a very intuitive aesthetic choice, because the original Candyman is filled with social commentary about race and race relations, but the original Candyman is largely from the perspective of white people. The original Candyman is critical of how white people sometimes meddle in the affairs of black people, or how white people try to trivialize the pain and suffering of black communities. Even when they're well-meaning and they try to do well, a lot of times how they do a lot of harm. So the original Candyman is from a white perspective, from the outside looking in, whereas this one concentrates more on the black characters and their experiences and their relationships to Candyman. So it's from the inside looking out. So I think those type of those shot selections are perfectly complementary towards each other, and I think this makes this movie like an answer to the original Candyman, the yin and the yang, the white perspective and the black perspective on something that, on a horror legend that is very mixed up in racial politics, social commentary, class politics, gentrification. Really interesting choices. Aside from that being a how would I describe it? Like kind of like a symbolic choice to have the shots from the inside looking out. It also has a lot of stuff here that I would call Kubrickian. The composition. Look at the if you're watching this on YouTube, you could see it on Michael's background. That looks like a shot straight out of 2001 to me. The way that it's framed in the center, the type of architecture that's going around, the upside down shots that it has, the very symmetrical framing and the very clean lighting. Very Kubrickian. Maybe I read too much into it, or I heard too much people say that, but I really did see that a lot in this movie.
Well, there's a lot going on in this film, period. There's a lot of story. There's a lot of good acting. There's a lot of great, compelling dialogue. There's a lot going on here, so much so that's why it feels so short. It's only an hour and a half, but it feels even shorter than that. That's why I don't understand some people saying they got bored by it. And, like, how could you be bored by such an eventful film? I mean, it does feel short, but it's kind of this self-contained story that kind of hits you like a ton of bricks and then just ends.
Well, my complaint is actually the opposite. I think the movie could have been 15 or 20 minutes longer. There's a part of me that feels, and I could have swore, I could be wrong, but I could have swore, I remember when I read the old IMDb page that this was like going to be like almost a 2-hour film. I get the feeling that they might have cut it down for commercial purposes and to make it a little bit more digestible. I do feel like there's 10 or 15 minutes possibly missing from this movie, at least from my perspective, because I do like the climax. I like the ending, and I like how it plays out, and I think it's all very well set up. However, I do think that once it gets to a certain point towards the end, it kind of starts sprinting and rushing in a way that the movie was not rushing before. Not that the movie ever took its time. It's not, like you said, it's very eventful, and it's not by any means slow. But I would have liked the climax to breathe a little bit more for my taste. I think that would probably be my biggest criticism of it, is that it's a little bit too short. I think that there's more to this. I don't think this movie needed to be this brief.
Yeah, the story pulled me in, and I liked being there. And it seemed like it kept me in the story like too little. Like I was taken out of it, and the story ended like you said. As the climax approaches, it's just one thing after another, and then the events just pick up, and it's so eventful in such a short amount of time.
I mean, this is how I would describe my reaction to the ending. The very second it ended and like the Candyman title comes up, there was a part of me that was a little let down for about 10 seconds. And I was thinking about it. I was like, oh, wait, that was an awesome ending. I think I was just unsatisfied because I felt so abrupt at the way that it came. I was like, that's it. I wanted to see more of it. But regardless, I have to say, I think it's better for a movie to leave you wanting more than for a movie to overstay its welcome. So take that criticism with a grain of salt.
Exactly. And I'm so used to movies that look this good and where the writing's this solid and then the camera work is so great. I'm so used to them luxuriating a little bit more, and letting it kind of hang in the air.
You know why? Because this movie has kind of like the vibe and like the artistic feel of what people deem like elevated horror, the A24 style of horror movies like Hereditary and The Witch. But it has the speed and the economy of more mainstream horror storytelling, like something like James Wan or Mike Flanagan. I think that's what makes it such a unique mix with movies that have this type of look. Usually luxuriate more. They don't like, not that James Wan or Mike Flanagan rush, but I think they go for a more crowd-pleasing thing. So it's an interesting mix between a crowd-pleasing narrative and art house aesthetics and sensibilities.
Yeah, and I can't go without mentioning the kills. I love the kills in this. I mean, of course, I would, being a horror fan, I would have rather seen them be much more in your face and gory, but that's not what Candyman is all about.
And it never has.
And it never has been. So the kills were really cleverly shot. You could feel them without actually seeing them, and some of you could actually see more kills in this one than the original. Yeah, and that high-rise window kill. It begins with an excellent invisible throat slit. And then you have the shot from the outside of the high-rise window. And what's really effective about that is it's kind of panning out. And I thought I was done seeing the kill with the throat slit. And then when the person starts getting dragged all over the apartment, you see this traumatic thing going on, and nothing's calling attention to it. And then as you pan out, you see the neighbors in the accompanying apartments just oblivious of the horror that's going on next to them. I thought that made that shot so effective.
I thought that was such a brilliant shot the way that is. You never see horror films killed like that, because at first it's just a simple pan out of the apartment, what you're describing. And at first when it's panning out and you're seeing the whole apartment, it just seems like a typical shot that's just revealing, like exteriors. You're like, okay, it's cool. And then it catches your eye like, wait, what the hell's happening in there? And then you see somebody get their throat being slit, then being dragged across the window and being tossed around by an entity that you can't see. And like you said, there's nothing to call attention to itself. There's a quietness to the scene, and all you see is people just behaving normally in their apartments like that. And I think it's that almost cold indifference of that shot that makes it a little bit more chilling. The fact that it doesn't emphasize it, the way that it just treats it like a casually tossed off thing. Really well executed. It actually has a few really well executed kill scenes. I think the other one in the art museum was really well staged.
The gallery.
Very shocking. I like the reactions of that guy, that annoying ass art weirdo. After the girl's throat gets slit right in front of him. The reactions, the way that pulls around, so well staged, so well shot. I like the color scheme of that whole sequence. I like the sequence later, which we've seen a lot of, like you've hinted at in the trailers, when the high school girls are in the bathroom and then they see Candyman. There's another brilliant shot where you don't see everything that's going on, but you kind of see the aftermath. You see the girls peeking underneath the stall, and you don't see what's happening to the girl, but you see her get lifted off the floor and blood just pouring, like he just poured, like almost like the way it looks when you see the blood pouring from underneath the stall. It almost looks like somebody took a bucket and just dumped a bunch of blood out. So that alone already creates a lot of things in your head that you don't know what's happening. All you see is a lot of blood. You don't know what's happening, and I think that kind of creates this kind of terror. Then it cuts to this really brilliant shot of one of the girls drops her one of her little makeup kits, you know, those makeup things that you
Yes.
open, and you see the mirror, and the camera pans down from inside the stall, and we see and the camera concentrates on the reflection of the girls being killed in the mirror, and you see them coming in and out of frame and being dragged about. So creative and so well staged without showing anything but really selling the terror. Yeah, I thought the kill scenes in here were really well executed. There's a couple of times where I thought it was a little bit subdued, and I could have wished they would have went a little bit more for it, but I'm not really too upset about that, unlike a lot of fans, and this is something that needs to be addressed. All right, so before we get to any of the woke, quote-unquote, woke criticism, I need to address this thing about the kills. I see everybody online, not everybody, but so many people complaining that the movie doesn't have too many of the on-screen kills. Too many of the kills are off-screen because they're more focused on social commentary than horror. Thus, it's not a serious horror movie. That's the argument I've seen. I've seen the original Candyman 40 minutes with you before we went to go see the new Candyman. I watched it again after I watched the new Candyman, and then I watched it again yesterday to take a bunch of notes on it. So I've seen this movie 3 times within the span of a few days of the original Candyman, and I can tell you, there is only one on-screen kill in the entire original Candyman. Everything that you remember that you think happened off-screen. The boy who gets his private parts ripped off happens off-screen. Bernadette, after she's brutalized, happens off screen. You just hear her scream, and then it cuts to it later. You see the aftermath of it. Same thing at the beginning. You don't see the girl when they're telling the story with one of the Raimi brothers. All you see is blood pour from the ceiling. You don't see what happens. Time and time again throughout the entire movie, you never actually see the kills at all. There's only one scene in the original Candyman where you see it where there's an on-screen kill, and it's the moment where Helen is talking to her lawyer, summons Candyman to prove that she's not lying, and he comes up from behind him and uses his hook to slice him all the way up from his spine all the way to the top of his back. Even then, it's shot from the front, so you don't even see it happening. You're not even seeing it. So these complaints that, oh, it sacrifices the gore and the horror for social commentary are absolutely 100% objectively stupid. Go back and watch the original film. There is not a single on-screen kill aside from that one. And I'd argue this one's even more graphic than the original, which makes those complaints even more. The throat slit inside of the museum, which you see, it happens really quick because it's like a ghost running around and you just see it happen really quick, so it's startling. But that's actually more graphic than anything shown in the original Candyman, just that one scene. So that needs to be addressed. No, there are not too many off-screen kills. That was always what the original Candyman was like. So that is a completely nonsensical, irrelevant complaint.
And that all those bathroom kills felt like the kills in the original Candyman, where you're not seeing much, but you're hearing it, you're seeing glimpses of it, and it makes you feel like you're seeing the whole thing.
Yeah. Candyman is not Jason Voorhees. You don't go to these films if you want to see people hacked up in creative ways. I mean, obviously, there's going to be some kill scenes and you want them to be effective and scary, but people need to remember that they are tacking on expectations to Candyman that were these things that were never, ever part of the franchise at all, and the people acting like these elements were part of the franchise. No, the hell they were not. They never were. To expect them to be tacked on now is kind of dumb.
Yeah, and one of the most graphic kills, by the way, that I loved was actually a human killing a human. It wasn't even Candyman. It was one of the human characters killing the human villain. It was a gnarly stabbing. That was one of the most graphic kills in the whole film.
You know, I think people might forget that one because it happens to a bad guy. It doesn't happen to the victim, but people don't get as scared. But that, too, is also more graphic than anything in the original Candyman. So, yeah, I actually think this is gorier than the original Candyman. Not that I think this is a gory movie. It's very subdued, like I said. But technically, it's gorier than the original Candyman. Sorry, people. It is.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So I wanted to get into the story of it. So it's based on Clive Barker's short story, The Forbidden, But The Forbidden revolved around the themes of the British class system in contemporary Liverpool, London. Bernard Rose just had a chance meeting with Clive Barker, and he talked him into licensing the rights. So then Rose fit the story to Cabrini Green. It was after he kind of went around location scouting and he found Cabrini Green, and it seemed to fit this story perfectly. So he shifted the focus to race and social class in the U.S. inner city, which isn't a far cry from Clive Barker's original vision for the story. It's just a different area.
And to be really quick, just to tack on the thing that you said, Candyman also has had a lot to do with class issues. There's a lot of commentary on not just race and class. And like you said, that comes from the original Clive Barker short story. And naturally transplanting that from Britain to the United States is going to alter it a little. Not too much, not really too much, but it's going to alter it a little because race relations in America are not the same as they are in Europe or in the United Kingdom. So, of course, it's only natural, and I think it would be dishonest to try to toss a racial element out of it if you're going to relocate to the projects in the United States.
So it's Bernard Rose that changed the story to what it is, and I think this new Candyman just expanded on that. So for those who don't know, Cabrini Green was a public housing project in North Chicago, and it housed over 15,000 people. There was a lot of crime, a lot of neglect. They were poorly built. And it proved to be an example of exactly what was wrong with the public housing system in the U.S. It started to be torn down like just a couple of years after the original Candyman was filmed, and the last building was demolished in 2011. And then since then has been redeveloped with upscale high-rises and townhomes because of its proximity to downtown. So everything that this discussed, everything that happens in the movie happened in real life. It's like, it's the perfect telling of this story to kind of match real life. And I don't think it clubs us over the head with any of this. Mm-hmm. It's just characters discussing it. What would you like those characters to do? Just ignore? They're in Cabrini Green. They're in the new Cabrini Green. By the way, a lot of the movie was filmed in the real Cabrini Green, the couple of row houses that were left. Mm-hmm. You're in Cabrini Green. You're talking about what really happened in real life. So what is the complaint here?
I don't see what the complaint is. I just think that some people live a very sheltered existence, and having to hear about the suffering of any communities, as long as it doesn't relate to them, is frustrating and annoying to some people. And I think that's really sad because it's indicative of a closed-mindedness and an inability to see any perspective outside your own limited perspective. You know what I mean? I think that's what a lot of it comes from. So the idea that we are going to take a horror story, mind you, whose origins are dealt with racism. Candyman is very much about the supernatural fallout of a hate crime. It's about the pain and the suffering of a hate crime being so powerful that it leaves this lasting psychic supernatural scar that reverberates and causes pain and suffering through generations. It's about generational trauma that does not go away. So to expect these elements to be taken out is kind of bizarre. You want to place something in Cabrini Green in the projects, but you don't want to talk about what Cabrini Green is, what it means to live there, and the significance of Cabrini Green in the United States. Because I believe in the 80s and the 90s, Cabrini Green was always in the news all the time. It was I think it was described as being the most dangerous area in the United States. So if you don't want that social commentary, you basically want to take Candyman out of Cabrini Green and put him somewhere else, and that's not Candyman anymore. You're getting rid of all the social commentary. It's so baked into the legend of Candyman that these complaints are, frankly, really bizarre. It's a weird flex for people to just brag about how they never understood the original Candyman. I find that very funny. People don't realize that they're low-key just putting on display that I never understood the original movie, and I'm going to get pissed that the sequel actually expands upon the themes that were already very present in the film to begin with.
Yeah, and if you just sit down and enjoy the film for what it is, and stop being triggered by everything that seems like a triggering, effect to you, or you think that they're trying to demonize white people or some shit like that. It's done very classy here. And for me, it feels like a natural continuation of the first story, because Bernard Rose's Candyman addressed white anxiety and the image of a big scary black man. And then in the new one, it kind of morphs it into the story kind of evolves and changes it to address the many things that bring injustice to black people.
Yes.
And it tells it in a fairly subtle way. I mean, it's woven into the story no more than the original, but the only thing besides that makes this new one a little bit more political is just a little bit of discussion between the characters, just a little bit.
And here's the thing. It's a little bit of discussion. So I'm going to start one of my comparisons just because I took notes on the original Candyman to find all of the subtext, just to show that a lot of these complaints are ridiculous. So I want to address a big complaint about this Candyman. There's too many conversations about gentrification and, issues that affect the black community, and specifically issues that affect Cabrini Green. People are saying that there are too many conversations that address gentrification and what happened to Cabrini Green, and how upper class people kind of like pushed a lot of impoverished people out of there. You know how you've seen that complaint online, right?
Yeah.
It's in the original film already. Both films deal with how the government and cities treat housing projects and impoverished neighborhoods with minorities. The first one dealt with redlining. The new one deals with gentrification. In the original, Helen actually has a discussion with her friend Bernadette about how her condo was built as a housing project at the same time as Cabrini Green. She even goes on to say that the condos only became condos when the city realized that there was no barrier to separate the ghetto from the rest of the city, unlike in Cabrini Green. Hence, they just decided to change it up a little bit, make it a little bit nicer, a little bit fancier. Since there was nothing to separate it, it's their way of keeping impoverished communities cut off from the rest of society, cut off from access to other things. So right there in the original film, they are already having conversations about these topics. And Cabrini Green was already being gentrified. So the new movie's discussions only seem like an extension of the original film's discussion. So people out there saying that it's weird for them to have conversations about this, no, the hell it's not. Go back and watch the original movie. They have a very explicit conversation about this topic where Helen goes out of the way to acknowledge her privilege in that specific situation, the fact that she gets to live in an area that was designed as a housing project, but because they couldn't separate the ghetto, she was able to get it as a condo. So please, I don't want to hear that complaint anymore unless you watched the original one on mute, which I'm convinced some people must have watched Candyman on mute. Her privilege is touched on again in the original, Helen Lyle, when she gets mugged, and she points out that it's infuriating that police ignore the crimes and violence that the community endures on a daily basis, but they come running as soon as a white woman is attacked. Is that too woke for you people?
So it's okay when it's said by a white person, or what?
I don't understand. I think it's really funny. A lot of people in horror, and I think it's really sad, are now pissed off at all the messages that they are barely seeing in all the, oh my God, Candyman is now too political. It's woke. It deals with race relations. Go back and watch the original film. Did you ever see Night of the Living Dead? Very much about race relations. I'm going to scream when Jordan Peele, because you know how he's working on The People Under the Stairs, right? A reboot of it.
Yeah.
I'm going to scream when I hear that The People Under the Stairs reboot is too woke, because there are very few horror films that are more overtly political. Horror, storytelling, movies, literature has been filled with subtext since time immemorial. It is a part of the storytelling process. Storytelling, film, writing is an art form. Art form is self-expression. So naturally, any art form is going to express things that are important to its makers. Art is made there to reflect the fears of society. It's made there to reflect the anxieties. It's made to reflect the anxieties of the artist who created them. And it's made to reflect the values and the belief systems of the artist in question. These elements, the subtext, politics, philosophy, all of these things are so intrinsic to storytelling that if you ever took a literary class, one of the big things you have to do is delve into subtext and the meaning of stories and the points that people are trying to get across. And now, because a bunch of people barely realize that storytelling, oh my God, storytelling has more to it. Now they want us to dumb down all entertainment for the sake of people who never understood storytelling. And it just kind of has illustrated how a lot of these horror films that people claim to be fans of, they never understood them in the first place.
Yeah, it shows how warped our society is, and it seems to be becoming even more warped because the more backlash against racism, the more it invites racists to bitch. You know what I mean?
Bitch and moan.
So and another interesting comparison I found was that the first film was controversial, but for opposite reasons. There weren't people screaming that it was too woke back when the Candyman face first came out. So it was controversial for the opposite reasons, even though it had almost equal the racial undertones, dialogue, and message. But people had a problem with the depiction of racism and racial stereotypes. So it was just the opposite problem. The production company was actually so scared that they asked Bernard Rose to meet with the NAACP several times. So when he would meet with the NAACP, they would sit down and look at the script, and they would look at him, and they said, "Why are we having this meeting? And why shouldn't a black actor be a ghost? Why shouldn't a black actor play Freddy Krueger or Hannibal Lecter? If you're saying that they can't be, it's really perverse. This is a horror movie." And then
go on.
And also at the time of the film's release, Virginia Madsen was actually scared about it too. She said, "I was and am now worried about how people will respond. I don't think Spike Lee will like this film." How the hell is our society just completely warped and turned the other way on this one?
It just shows you a lot of shifting perceptions, and especially with the Candyman legacy is very complicated because on the one hand, I do think that the original Candyman is very political. It's very aware of race. It's very aware of class privileges. It's loaded with social commentary. The only thing that I think dates it, which would not fly, and which is why the new Candyman is different, is to take a story that's largely a little about like black anxieties and black fears and to center it on a white woman. So there is an element that is vaguely problematic about the original Candyman in that aspect. On the other hand, I don't think that if you didn't make it about a white lady or a white person, it would not have the same type of commentary it does. The original Candyman, and this is going to upset a lot of people, it's very much about how white people trivialize and downplay the suffering of black communities. And with Helen Lyle, she's a very well-meaning person, but she's clueless and privileged. So to her, oh, the Candyman, see, it's all in their heads. There's no Candyman. She acts like he's just an avatar to project their fears and anxieties onto. She doesn't take she doesn't take them seriously. She doesn't believe them when she's telling the truth. And so she decides to meddle around, and she bites off a lot more than she can chew. And like many academics, she treats these people more like study subjects than people. So there's a lot of commentary in there about Helen's kind of, I don't know how to put her arrogance, her failure to realize that she's coming from a place of privilege. And the way that she downgrades the suffering of the community is very disrespectful. The film also deals with class issues in a more complex way. If you think about it, Bernadette is also black, but she comes from a more upper class and privileged background than the residents of Cabrini Green. When they encounter Anne Marie, who is reprises her role in the new Candyman, she scolds both of them. She's not just scolding Helen Lyle. She's also scolding Bernadette. She lectures them about how she doesn't like how colleges like to portray their community as gangbangers, drug addicts, and criminals. Bernadette, like Candyman himself, also a black person who was separated largely from the injustices and pain that a lot of black people from his era suffered because he was the son of an emancipated slave who became very wealthy, grew up around rich, privileged society, so he was not used to that level of racism. So it's a little bit of a shock when he actually suffers the type of hate crime, and I think that's what leaves everlasting pain that kind of creates this powerful urban legend that won't die. Stems from the fact that he's shocked that they would treat him this way or they view him as being less than human. Bernadette does the same thing. Like Helen, she's a lot more respectful than Helen. She tries a little bit harder than Helen not to be a little bit crude about her methods and the way that she approaches it. She's still messing around in the affairs of things that she doesn't understand. And then when she comes face to face with Candyman himself, she gets a lot more than she bargained for. A lot of the class commentary is very deeply inlaid in the original Candyman in a very complex and interesting ways. And like I said, that goes back to the original Clive Barker text of The Forbidden, which is loaded with with class commentary. And if you don't like social commentary in your horror, you might want to take that up with Clive Barker, because apparently he saw fit to put some social commentary in his horror too.
Like I said before, this avoids what a lot of black people have been complaining about, was too much black trauma porn and being used as tropes. And then white people were complaining about that too, because they claimed that was shoving the racism down their throats. Well, this one doesn't do either. So many have been complaining about directors using the plight of black people to elicit scares, yet some still view it as being too much. It's like they don't want to see black stories or hear black voices at all.
Yeah.
It's like you can be in a movie that I'm going to go watch, but you can't say anything about the plight of your people. You can't say anything about what this story has to do with. It's ridiculous. I'm getting pissed.
Yeah. And like I said, the Candyman story is largely about Cabrini Green, a real area. And I think it would be a little bit, how would I put it? I think it would be dishonest to make a movie about the Cabrini Green area housing projects that's been gentrified over the years and literally say nothing about that and nothing about what it means. I think that would be totally missing the mark to even do that. It's like people don't want any art. It's like art can no longer challenge you. Art can no longer get you to think. People want to reduce art and artistic ventures into things that are just stupid, frivolous. They can never challenge you. They can never challenge your preconceived notions. They can never put anything there in there that makes you uncomfortable. I hate to break it to you, but films, art, it's not put there to make you feel comfortable. That's not what art is for. It is designed actually to do the exact opposite. If the Candyman movies, if the racial subtext makes you uncomfortable, that's probably intentional. Yeah.
And I love some of the stuff that was said by the executive producer of that horror Noir, the documentary. It's a documentary on Shudder about the history of black horror films. Her name is Tananarive Due. She said, "There is a lot of racial PTSD in the U.S., and horror is uniquely suited to give people who have survived trauma or people who fear trauma an outlet. My mother loved horror films. She watched all of them. If she had lived to see Get Out, that would have been her favorite. What a thrill it is to have more than one movie a year that centers around black people in a horror story. As a black horror fan, it's been a long road to find the kind of representation that is empowering." And I think that's exactly what this is, and that's exactly why so many people are getting pissed about it.
Yeah. I mean, you know what? Nia DeCosta can laugh all the way to the bank. That's all I'm going to say. She made a kick-ass film. Do I think it's perfect? No. Do I think it's as good as the original Candyman? No. But, you know, I didn't really expect did anybody actually expect this to be better than the original Candyman? I don't think anybody.
No.
That's a real. But she managed to make a film in that universe and still make it her own, still make it a beautiful film, still make a film that feels very personal. The movie feels very personal. You could tell that it's something that she relates to and that the story means a lot to her. It's made a ton of money. So that only tells me that this backlash is the thrashing of people who are losing. It's the thrashing and whining of people who are losing. You know what I mean?
And why do they think they're losing? It's ridiculous.
Yeah, it is really kind of ridiculous. But I'm here for it, dude. I love and a lot of people, and I've seen this in a lot of horror groups, that it's happened a couple times in some of the horror groups I'm in. Somebody will ask for a recommendation on a black horror film, and the comment section always melts down with a bunch of sensitive people think, "Oh, would you look for a white movie or anything like that?" And I think that's such a ridiculous thing to say, because the majority of films, period, are white. And people say it shouldn't make a difference. I'm like, no, it does make a difference, because films made by different races of different people are going to reflect different fears, different ideas, different anxieties. The anxieties and fears of black communities are not the same anxieties and fears of white communities. And I don't think it's a problem to have to acknowledge this. I think that people get way too touchy when it comes to that topic. So I do want to see more black horror. I think that black people bring a very unique voice to the genre, and we don't see enough black horror. I don't think. And some of my favorite horror films are black horror films, whether it be like Ganja and Hess, Candyman, another one of my favorites, Tales from the Hood. It adds such a different flavor and a completely different perspective to horror movies than you would ever see. For example, George A. Romero is a white man who is very political and very aware of social issues, very aware of race, very aware of class. But even when he has a movie like, say, Night of the Living Dead, which is groundbreaking because there were no, other than Sidney Poitier at the time that Night of the Living Dead came out, there weren't many horror films with black actors in the lead. And it's great. It's groundbreaking. But it still comes from the perspective of a white person, and it is progressive, but a white person can only understand that perspective, can empathize with it, but they can only understand it to a certain extent. I think that's why we need to see more black voices in horror. And while I love the original Candyman, I don't think we're in an era anymore where people want to see white filmmakers making movies about making black horror movies, and that's kind of understandable. We've seen it so much in the past. The original Candyman's a great movie, but it only makes sense that in this day and age, you want the Candyman legend and future Candyman films to be handled by black people and the black community, because Candyman is largely about racial issues. Candyman is probably the first big black supernatural slasher. Not if you don't count Blackula, but Blackula is just basically a riff on Dracula. That's a whole other topic. So I'm here for it. I want to see more representation. I want to see more black horror. I want to see more Latino horror. I want to see more queer horror. I want to see all of it. I think the variety of voices is going to make the horror genre thrive. It's what's going to make it better. It's going to make it more unique, and it's what's going to keep it. The variety of voices and diversity is what's going to keep horror from growing stale.
And everyone deserves to have a voice.
Yes.
And horror is the perfect genre for that, to bring multiple voices into a horror story, and play on each person's fear.
Yeah.
Every person has their own unique fears. And why do you have to just play on your own and not anybody else's?
And that's the wonderful thing about horror, is that what I love about horror is it takes all of our fears and it kind of exaggerates them in a certain way that satire does. But a lot of horror literature, a lot of horror films are about more realistic fears that people live with on an everyday in everyday life. Horror movies take these situations, they amplify it by adding slasher elements or supernatural elements and add a layer of fun. And it allows us to deal with those fears in a way that allows us to release our anger, release our anxiety, and release our fears without the actual danger that sometimes comes with it. It's still okay because you're being told, these fears and these ideas are being communicated with you through a story that's very compelling and that's very fun. And I think that's perfect what Candyman does, especially the new one. It reflects the fears of society. It reflects the fears of a certain community. And it does it in a way that makes it easy for everybody to relate to, because it puts it in the form of a supernatural slasher. It does it in the form of good storytelling. And that's what I love about horror. I think horror is one of the best and this is going against what most people like to say these days. I don't want to see more politics in my horror. I actually think horror is the best genre, the best movie genre for politics to be put into, because straight political movies that are just about their message and they're very straightforward are dull and boring. These messages are better communicated through scary stories, through ghost stories, through urban legends, through different ideas, through a variety of different ways. And that's what I love about the horror genre. It can take our everyday fears, put them a little bit on a pedestal, exaggerate them, and add all kinds of storytelling flourishes, allow us to confront these fears, but do it in a way that is kind of fun and we feel good after. There's a certain kind of release that comes with it. So yeah, horror should always be political. I don't think every horror movie should be political. Obviously, not every horror movie is going to involve politics, but the idea of removing politics from horror is silly to me. And it goes against everything that the genre has ever stood for ever since it's been around.
Yeah, and it's not like there aren't any movies that club you over the head with their politics. I mean, we were just complaining a while back about Tales from the Hood 2 being a little too literal, a little too clubbing over your head, a little too preachy, where you talk about what it feels like the characters are talking at you rather than just watching these characters interact.
Yeah.
So I get those complaints, but you can't relate them. You can't relate to those complaints to this movie here. They took too much care in making it the opposite of that. There's too much care taken in, and everybody's just glossing over all the little nuances that are in this film the great camera work, the great acting, and the writing is really good. I don't care what anybody says about the writing, saying too much about gentrification and all that. It's all really good, and it's woven into the story perfectly, I thought.
Yeah,
I
agree.
I wanted to go through, and we already addressed some of the common critiques, but I just wanted to go through a few of them that we see almost daily, several times a day in these horror groups. Too woke is the first one. I just got to tell you, the characters speak about gentrification of Cabrini Green while living in one of the new apartments and while filming in some of the last remaining homes. So shut the fuck up.
And again, there's a conversation about that in the original Candyman too, and it never bothered you.
Exactly. Not enough on-screen kills. We already just squashed that one.
Yeah.
There's none in the first.
Yeah.
It ignored.
Mike, I had to say it like that. We already squashed that on-screen kills. There's none in the first, and you just move on. Like, yeah, that's true. There's none. One.
And yeah, exactly. And the complaints that it ignores the original, ruins the original, dilutes the mythos. If you don't remember, there was also another Candyman in the first film that attacked Helen Lyle. It's the local drug dealer that called himself the Candyman, and he comes in and attacks her. It was right to be expanded that way.
It also shows you that the legend has always been played with and toyed with by the people of Cabrini Green, and it shows that the residents of Cabrini Green are very aware of Candyman and his connotations. Also, I wanted to say, one thing I thought was cool about the new one was the use of candies being tossed out and the incorporation of the stories of that chocolates with razor blades. That actually was the first movie when Helen crawls through the hole and she sees all those chocolates with the razor blades coming out of it. In the original movie, it's ambiguous, it's never explained, and it doesn't seem to have any kind of connection to the rest of the story. It's just creepy and weird and kind of there. This movie gives a very solid reasoning and explanation and kind of shows that there's always been more to the legend, whether it's the other guy in the original saying, "I'm looking for Candyman, bitch," or the candies laying around with razor blades that have nothing to do with the original Candyman. The original movie was already kind of hinting at there being more to this legend than what we're being shown and told in this movie.
And every appearance of that candy worked for me.
Yeah.
I mean, every single one was effective. It was never overkill. I didn't feel like it was just something that they threw in there. It was kind of woven throughout and explained. So I like that whole thing. And the other criticism of not enough Tony Todd, I can kind of see that criticism because the nerd in me, like as we were watching it and they showed the other Candyman that the main character kept seeing, I thought, oh, I'm missing Tony Todd here. I'm missing Tony Todd, but it was just the person in me, the fan in me that loves Tony Todd as the Candyman. But then after the movie, and you think back on it, it kind of would have ruined what this movie was doing. It kind of would have made it an extension of the first one instead of being an evolved version of the first one, where the story evolved, not necessarily the movie. I like the first one better as well, but I think the story evolved, and it was because of that.
And that's another thing. I had the same problem at first. When I was watching some of the scenes, I kept thinking, like, as good as it is, there's no reason for Tony Todd not to be here because he's just a creepier presence. But thinking back when the movie was over, that would completely violate what the story is about, and what you'd basically be asking for a completely different movie. And I think the inner fanboy in us all wants to see more Tony Todd. But if you're being honest with yourself, it's not right for this story that they're telling.
Yeah.
It's not right for it. It doesn't work.
Yeah, I realized that after watching it, but some people don't check themselves like that. They just let their inner horror nerd just hate it.
And I get it. We all want to see more Tony Todd. Doesn't, but I mean, deal with it. It is what it is. This isn't just serving you up nostalgia. It's trying to give you something new. It's trying to give you a completely different experience. It's not trying to repeat Candyman.
But thinking back on it, he came around at just the right time of the story, and he was there for just the amount of time that felt right.
In a way that kind of cements the legend of Candyman and brings it full circle back to the original Candyman without spoiling it.
Yeah, like in the middle of all those crazy events that happen in the climax, I just loved it. I love the whole climax. I love how everything played out.
Mhm.
The little appearance of Tony Todd, just the icing on the cake to a really good movie, I thought.
Yeah.
And I want to go over a few facts of the movie. First of all, I found it interesting, the audience score and the Metacritic score. All right, the audience score of the original is C+.
The original.
Yeah, and the Metacritic score of the original was 61 out of 100. Now for the 2021 film, it got a B audience score. So the audience is enjoying this one much more than the first one. And then it got a 72 out of 100. So the critics are even enjoying it more. And this is even more critics than review the first one.
Well, I think what that has to do with is that it's a nostalgia thing, and everybody wants to pretend that the original Candyman was received with universal love, and this new one is just an aberration and a complete violation of what the original Candyman. And that's funny that you point that out, that it wasn't even that well received over time. I think that its reception, like a lot of great horror movies, was probably its reputation and perception was probably developed more on home video as people watched it and rented it over the years, and it became more of a classic as time went on. I think it's one of those horror movies, its impact came a little bit more on the home video market than on its theatrical run.
Yeah. And also, I found it kind of funny that in 2004, so this movie has actually been in development since 2004. So 2004 is the first time they tried to develop a new Candyman movie, but it was a crossover, and it was already in development. It was Candyman versus the Leprechaun. And of course, the great Tony Todd turned it down, and he said he would never be involved in something like that. Thank you, Tony Todd.
I'm pretty sure it's to capitalize on the Wild Freddy versus Jason success, but to take such a classy mythical character like Candyman that's I don't know, that's so tied to urban legends and social commentary and so many of these big important ideas, and then to slap him together with this campy ass little character who makes filled with it's not a good mix. It doesn't go together.
Yes, a typical word. Studio doesn't quite understand the movie that it owns.
Yes.
And also, I thought it was interesting. Lakeith Stanfield was considered for Anthony, but he took Judas and the Black Messiah instead.
You know what? I'm not going to knock him for that, because, I mean, he was amazing in Judas and the Black Messiah.
And I would have liked to see Lakeith Stanfield, but this new guy is really good.
But Yaya AbdulMateen, I was very excited for, because I saw him in the Watchmen series that came out in late 2019, and he blew me away in that one. And this only shows that he's a really solid actor.
And his character arc from victim to villain is just awesome, and I love the moment he becomes a villain. Oh, so great.
Yep.
And you know that moment. It's one of the great moments of the climax. And one last fact is Eddie Murphy was the first choice to play the original Candyman, but the studio couldn't afford him. Could you imagine Candyman, Eddie Murphy?
I can't, and that just sounds absolutely bizarre. Thank God that didn't happen, because, oh man, I can't picture it.
Yeah, because Tony Todd's big booming voice and his presence was so much.
Yeah,
had so much to do with the effect of the first one.
Well, Tony Todd's a classically trained actor, like a stage actor. And I think Candyman is one of probably the classiest of horror movie villains. He's sophisticated. He's elite. He's suave. He's well-dressed. He's a man of taste and style and fashion. He's an artist. Freddy Krueger is a dirty child molester. Jason is some freak that came out of some zombie freak. They don't even know what he is. That series doesn't even know what he is. And Michael Myers is just like this faceless entity. Chucky's a killer, voodoo infested killer doll. Candyman has an air of sophistication to him. So you need a classically trained stage actor for this role. I don't think you can just toss in a Hollywood star like Eddie Murphy and expect it to work. Candyman requires a very specific type of actor. And I think Tony Todd is just the right type of actor to fit that bill. You need a classically trained actor for something like that.
And the story also calls for a specific type of storytelling, and I thought they did it excellently here.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the way they handled it with integrity and passion, and I just thought it was really engrossing. And basically, I thought the first one, because we, like you said, we watched it right before we watched this new one. The first one, Tony Todd's voice gives you chills right away. It's very gothic. It has a lot of romanticism. It really pulls you in and never lets you go. And you feel like after you watching it, you just watched a bona fide classic. Like, I'll always remember this movie. And I didn't have quite that reaction with this one, but at the end of it, I thought that was refreshing. It was just what I wanted. That was a really good movie. So basically, it's a great continuation. Mm-hmm. And I think it's about as good as it should be.
Yeah, I think so. And it gives me, I don't know what their plans are at the moment, if they're going to make more sequels, if this is going to be like Candyman kills and Candyman ends. Just kidding, I don't think that's going to happen. But I guess I wouldn't mind seeing more. Only to see, the only thing, I think that they made such a distinctly different film from the first one that still honors the original and obviously is the same universe, that I think a sequel would have to do something even different to make it stand out. It has to have its own voice that's distinct from it. Because if you want to count this as the franchises, this is part. If you want to ignore part 2 and 3 and say this is the official second one, it's so radically different that I think a part 3 would require another slight reinvention or I don't know, a little bit of a shift in tone or something different. There has to be something different about it if it's going to stand apart from this one the way that this one stands apart from the original Candyman.
Well, at the end of it, I was left feeling like I want to see Yaya AbdulMateen as the Candyman in a whole movie, because this one is so much the arc of the person he was to becoming the Candyman. Now I want to see him as full on Candyman and see what he does with it.
So do I. Oh yeah, Mike. While you're at it, go and check him out in Watchmen. Go watch that show, damn it. He is so good at that. Him and Regina King. I know that's completely off topic, but if you want to see more of his on-screen presence and his acting and what he's capable of, go check that show out as soon as you can. So much I want to say, but I don't want to spoil it. Please go check out the HBO Watchmen. You haven't seen it.
Well, he was awesome in Aquaman. I feel like I wanted to see him more on that one.
Oh shit, I forgot he was in Aquaman, actually. Yeah, you're right. He was in Aquaman. But yeah,
Not enough though.
Yeah. So overall, I really dug New Candyman. I think that it's maybe a little, there's a couple of parts where the fanboy in me was a little bit frustrated. Maybe a couple of scenes where it was a little bit too subdued. Maybe we could have gotten 10, 15 minutes longer. I really do think that this movie should have been a little bit longer. But overall, we got a really exciting, refreshing, original horror film. A horror film that stands out in today's market. A horror film that has its own unique voice, its own unique style, its own unique look. And I dug it. I thought it was a really good movie. Flaws and all, I would definitely want to see it again. I'm looking forward to revisiting again in the future and doing even more comparisons between this and the original Candyman. I'm looking forward to more from Nia DeCosta. I think she's a very talented filmmaker, very good with actors, and she is just amazing with visuals. I mean, this woman captures really gorgeous. Some of the shots are borderline show-offy, aren't they? She does, and the smokiness of it, and the camera being upside down and going through the buildings, just all of it. So many different aesthetic images that really stick out in my head. And like I said, it looks nothing like the original Candyman.
No, but it has that spirit. It's just like with why I like Suspiria so much is that it wasn't anything. It wasn't anything like the original, but it had that spirit.
Yeah,
and that's the same way this one is. And I really hope that this is a theatrical cut that they put in, because it's wham bam, thank you, ma'am. You're in and out. Tells a good story, good effective movie, and you're out. So I'm hoping when the Blu-ray comes out or something, it's a uncut director's cut, and we get at least another 30 minutes added on.
Yeah, I would like to see a longer cut. So, for all you horror fans out there, if you haven't jumped on it, go check out the new Candyman. As a suggestion for people out there, there's a lot of confusion. Some people think it's a remake. It's not a remake. I don't think that you need to see the original in order to appreciate this. However, I would strongly recommend either watching it if you haven't seen it, or if you haven't seen it in a really long time, to rewatch it and refresh your mind before you watch it again. Because I think the more familiar you are with the original Candyman, the more you're going to appreciate the new one, because it ties so much into the story of the original and the way that it kind of circles back to the original one and the way that it kind of continues what the original one was doing. I do think that it would benefit you greatly to watch the original before you check this one out. And like I said, I see a lot of people confusion whether or not, should I watch the original Candyman before seeing this? Yes, go watch it.
Yeah, and it doesn't dilute Candyman. It makes him bigger. He's expanded his mythos now. Now he's affecting even more people.
Yeah. And look, if the message bothers you, my only recommendation is go back to the original one and pay close attention to it, and ask yourself why it never bothered you in that film, but it bothers you in this film. Ask yourself why these messages that have always been in these horror films, why those old horror movies that did it are fine, but these new ones are not anymore. Ask yourself where the shift came along. That's all I'm asking the audience, is to interrogate themselves a little bit, to think about some of their preconceived notions. Challenge yourself and ask yourself, is this really a valid complaint? Has this always been here, or am I just bitching and moaning for the sake of bitching and moaning?
Yeah, ask yourself why you're being so overly critical.
Yeah.
And kind of analyze the things that you're complaining about a little bit before you start spewing them out into the world, because you look dumb.
Yeah. And I'm sorry for the little clickbaity title that we gave to this episode, The Woke Legacy of Candyman. But when Mike and I were having discussions on how to approach this movie and how we were going to discuss it, there was no way that we could get around the discourse that was surrounding this movie, the discourse around this, and the wokeness and the yah and the back and forth about the lack of gore and the racial issues. All of that I felt really needed to be addressed and put in its place in a certain way.
And I don't mind opposing opinions, but make some damn sense when you have an opposing opinion, and I'll listen to it.
So go check out the new Candyman. Check out the original Candyman. Follow us on Facebook, facebook.com/Pickles Horror Show. We have different news, updates, funny memes on that page every day. Follow us on Instagram, @Pickles Horror Show on Instagram. And please follow us on TikTok. It's @Horror Show Official. That's like our greatest hits selection of everything. You could get bite-sized clips of Mike and I. And please, if you want to hear more of our podcasts, if you want to watch them on YouTube or check them out on SoundCloud, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever, click the flow code, which I put in every episode, and that'll lead you to everywhere that our podcast is available. Keep up with us. We have a lot of stuff coming at you in the very near future. Mike and I are in the midst of, Mike is directing a music video right now. Keep up with us. We have a lot of stuff coming at you in the very near future. Mike and I are in the midst of, Mike is directing a music video right now, and we're in the midst of shooting it. Lots of exciting stuff to come out in the future. Our upcoming feature film that we wrote together that we're working on right now. Lots of stuff. Please keep up with us. Until next week, folks, happy horror.
Happy horror.